For some folks, they just can't give an inch, or else the whole project crumbles to the ground. You're basically trying to construct this singular, unified perspective that is presented by the whole Bible, when the reality is that there are texts that frequently disagree and directly contradict each other. Whatever biblical womanhood is just a reflection of a specific social group in a specific social setting. And right now, it's just groups trying to leverage the authority of the Bible to authorize their own particular social conventions as the ones that are authorized by God. And then they just say, oh, well, that's biblical womanhood because they want their particular socially embedded and contingent position to be the one that God wanted all along.
A kitten and Dan McClellan. This is going to hook them right away.
We're joined by two really
Icons.
famous guests.
Equally knowledgeable about the Bible.
One of them is a macrame artist, and the other a jazz flautist. So we'll leave that to you to guess. Dan, welcome to the show.
Dan McClellan.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
For those of you who may not know, Dan is a scholar in, what would you say you're like? I know some of your degrees, Near Eastern Studies and cognition and the religious experience, but what's your like?
So mainly I focus on the Hebrew Bible, but also Second Temple Judaism and some early Christianity. And I would say methodologically, I focus on cognitive science of religion, cognitive linguistics, and then critical biblical studies. And right now, because my main work is public scholarship, I'm trying to be a little bit more of a generalist, trying to reach out and expose myself to as much different scholarship related to the Bible, early Judaism, early Christianity as I can.
It's been great to see the amount of nonsense you've been debunking on TikTok alone has been very heartening.
Yeah, recently I've had to do some odd ones, particularly chasing down the history of the symbolism on the Oreo cookie, stuff like that. It has been weird, but there's always a way that somebody's going to tie some of this stuff back into the Bible. So
what is the biblical aspect of the Oreo?
Well, we've got you on the horn.
So there's a little symbol in the around the name Oreo on the cookie. It's a little oval, and then it has a little cross with two horizontal bars coming out of the top of it. And there's a claim that this is the Leviathan cross. This is a satanic cross, and it actually comes from the company that used to make the containers for the Nabisco company back in the early 20th century, called Inner Seal, and it's based on what's called a Lorraine cross. And back in the 14th and 15th century, a bunch of publishers would have their initials in this Lorraine cross over an orb, and it represented Jesus's sovereignty over the earth. So it's actually a Christian symbol that was taken up by Nabisco, and now it's just part of their logo, and so it's on the Oreo cookie. And a bunch of people who cannot think critically or Google competently try to, I don't know, chase clout or money or something by claiming that it's satanic.
It does seem like a subset of Christians think any symbol is satanic, and it's funny that it's actually one of yours.
Yeah, the call's coming from within the house, as it turns out. Yeah.
It always does.
Yeah, there's that happens a lot more frequently than I think a lot of people are aware.
That's so interesting.
Jesus is pro Oreo.
Oh,
That's
definitely.
kind of the takeaway there.
Yeah, double stuff all the way.
That was the original Eucharist, right?
And they're vegan too. So.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, no animal bloodshed involved. Well,
Yeah.
realistically, maybe some, but
But only for sacrificial purposes.
Yeah. As this is a Dan McClellan video, we have to do a fit check.
Oh yeah. So this
Yeah.
is. Let's see if we can get that.
Let's see it.
This is a shirt comes from a person who her company is called Marty Made It, and it's called Noah's Ra'em, and it is based on the story of Noah, the flood in the Bible. Ra'em is a Hebrew word that used to be translated in the Greek Septuagint, monokoros, which got translated into the Latin Vulgate as rhinoceros or something associated with a unicorn. So the King James Version translates it as unicorn, so there's some horns coming out of the middle of their forehead. But this is based on a Jewish legend that the Ra'em survived the deluge, Noah's flood, by swimming behind the ark, a modern spin on an ancient Jewish tradition.
I wonder what was the advantage of swimming behind the ark?
it
Seems like swimming anywhere, eventually you just get tired.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of different ways that people have come up with to try to rationalize how this or that creature or people group survived the flood. So the idea that the Nephilim were there before the flood and were also after the flood, people are like, well, how did they survive? And so there's this idea that they like clung to the edge of the ark, or that they also swam behind the ark or something. So a lot of silly traditions like that. And
Someone was
in
wakeboarding
the
behind.
past. Yeah.
Dinosaurs should have figured something out.
One of my favorite single-panel cartoons that's not a Far Side cartoon is a couple of dinosaurs on a little mound surrounded by water, and there's Noah's Ark off in the distance. And one says to the other, "Oh crap, was that today?"
That would have been brutal to have missed the boat. You'd really kick yourself. How many graphic tees do you think you own?
Well, I just made a video about that I published this
Really?
morning. Yes, I own 76.
Oh, whoa.
yeah,
Didn't
so-
expect you to have a concrete answer.
I happen to have, I made the video last night and posted it this morning, but one of the most common questions I get is, how many graphic tees? Whoop.
Yeah, okay.
Little
I thought I was
nibble
being
there.
really original and quirky with that one.
How many graphic tees do you own? So I did a little T-shirt tour, a comprehensive one. I went to the hamper, I went to the laundry room, I got everything I have, and so showed everything. So, but I have more on the way. I've always got tees on the way, and then this summer I'll be going to Comic-Con in San Diego, Dragon Con in Atlanta. We got FanX here in Salt Lake in September, and I always pick up tees when I go to the cons. They're a great place to get them.
Are you going to dress up, or are you just going dressed up
No.
as Dr. Dan McClellan?
Yeah, just as me. My
Cosplaying.
my daughter loves to cosplay.
And you have your own graphic tees too, right, that people can buy?
Yeah,
you have
I do.
merch?
I
Yeah.
do have merch. Yes.
Fun to be moving into your fashion influencer phase after 3 years.
Real quick, how did you get into religious studies? What was the spark for you? And
From-
biblical studies.
So I joined the LDS Church when I was 20 years old in the year 2000, and I committed to go on a mission a year later. And when I committed to do that, I realized I was going to be out there with a bunch of people just slightly younger than me or about my same age, who had been in the church their entire lives and who had read the scriptures. And I was like, I'm way behind. I've read the Book of Mormon, that's it. So I decided I was going to read all of the standard works before I left for my mission. And I fell in love with the Bible, and particularly the New Testament. I just loved reading it. And then I got out on my mission, and now I realize that now I'm way ahead of everybody else out here on the mission. 'Cause most of them hadn't really done much reading. But somebody gave me a gift. They gave me a Spanish translation of the Bible, a Catholic edition, so it had the Apocrypha in it. And then they gave me a Spanish translation of a Bible dictionary. And I read the Apocrypha because I had read everything else. I hadn't read that yet. And I just thought it was fascinating. I love the history. I love the culture. And I wanted to learn more about the languages. I'd always been fascinated by languages, and they seem like a puzzle to me, and I just liked solving puzzles. And then with the Bible dictionary, there was a little chart in it that showed like the Proto-Semitic and the Hebrew alphabets and then modern Latin equivalents. And I was like, if I had a Hebrew text, I could at least get close to how they were pronouncing these things. I didn't know what that was at the time, but it's called transliteration. And so I tried to teach myself Hebrew as a missionary. And
Wow.
you don't have a ton of
That's above
time.
and
Small
beyond.
task.
You don't have enough resources as a missionary, and I did an awful job.
Wait, did you go English speaking on your mission?
No, I went to Uruguay.
So you're learning
Spanish,
yeah.
Spanish and
Castellano.
then just throwing Hebrew into the mix. That's sort
Yes,
of a
just
passion
throwing
project.
Hebrew. Yeah, I was like, as long as I'm learning Spanish, I might as well learn Greek and Hebrew along the way.
Might as well.
But it was not easy to get a hold of like a Hebrew Bible and a Greek New Testament, and it certainly wasn't easy to get introductions or grammars or dictionaries or anything. I basically had to try to look at the Hebrew text, look at an English translation, and try to decipher what was going on. So I did an awful job of that. But they, while I was on my mission, they started up a new major at Brigham Young University called Ancient Near Eastern Studies, and I was like, that would be really cool. I'd love to major in that, love to go on to do graduate work. If I could make a living studying the scriptures, that'd be about the coolest thing in the world. And but I had already been kicked out of college once at the University of Northern Colorado with a muscular 0.29 GPA. So,
Gorgeous.
yes,
Wow,
I was like, the only chance I have is BYU, really, and I have to beg them to treat me kindly because I'm a convert returned missionary. I thought maybe that will give me a leg up. And
I did that too.
the first time I applied from my mission, they laughed at me. But I came back home and I did what's called a visiting student summer semester at BYU, where I took a Spanish class. And then at the end of it, they were like, you can test out of, however many credits of Spanish classes. And I was like, well, I'm basically fluent. So I tested out, and I don't remember how many credits I got, but several classes worth of credit. And I scored high enough that I got a 4.0 across the board. And then I did semester at what at the time was called Collin County Community College, which is now called Collin College in Plano, Texas.
Quite the alliteration.
Yeah, so I waltzed in the back door of BYU,
Gorgeous.
and they have since closed and padlocked that door and welded it shut. But yeah, so I was able to transfer in, but I've had to include that 0.29 transcript from the University of Northern Colorado on every application I've sent in since then.
Scarlet letter.
Yeah, and then when in the cover letter I have a paragraph explaining I was an idiot, smoked a lot of weed, drank a lot of Southern Comforts, got in a lot of fights.
It's good to be relatable, I think.
I
As
think
Dr.
so.
Dan McClellan.
Average college student.
You don't want to alienate the masses.
I think it was, and that was kind of the beginning of the period where I think college admissions were starting to recognize there was value in non-traditional students. I went to Oxford, and in the UK, they're a lot different about
Super easy
stuff.
to get into Oxford. I also breezed in. No, I never applied.
I turned him down. I was like, no thanks.
I was ecstatic to be able to go to Oxford. It was one of the most incredible experiences of my life, and I was really lucky to be able to transition to another master's program after completing the one at Oxford. Then I got admitted to go back to Oxford for the DPhil, or the PhD as they call it over there. But they didn't offer me any funding. And they were like, you need $290,000 in the bank to secure your place. And I was like, I don't know who you think is applying to your school from the United States, but I don't have that kind of money. But I happen to have this job land in my lap doing scripture translation for the LDS Church, scripture translation supervision for the LDS Church, which I started in January of 2013. So I luckily got a full-time salaried position. First time in my life, I was getting a paycheck where I knew what it was going to be every single time. Before that, I had waited tables for 7 years. I'd done all kinds of different odd jobs. But this was the first time I had my own health insurance. I had, all this kind of stuff. And so I did that for 10 years and managed to go start and complete a PhD that I also somehow managed to pay for between 2016 and 2020. I was very fortunate to be able to do that, thanks mostly to the support of my wife, who has been an incredible support for me through everything, moving all over the place.
Real quick, how did you two meet?
We met at BYU. University Villas was the apartment complex. Some ward activity. I think we were supposed to match up people who had served missions and people who had not served missions were going to be like their companions, and it was kind of this goofy role-playing thing. But I learned that she had served her mission in Germany, Munich, Austria. That was the name of the mission at the time. But she learned German on her mission. I had spent some time in Austria. I learned German all through high school. I was awful at it, but I loved the German language. I loved the country. I loved pretty much everything except most of the food. So I was like, I'd love to, she was stationed in this little town called, which one was it? Linz. And I had been to Linz. I was like, I've never known anybody who even knows where that place is. And she lived there for several months. So I started talking to her, and she wasn't a big fan of me initially. But then we started hanging out more, and all went downhill from there.
You're like, I can impress you. And she's like, let's see it.
Did you have an interest in the Bible before you became LDS?
Nope.
Never really cared about it before then?
No, the first time I ever read the Bible was, I was like 12 or 13 or something like that, and my mom, I wasn't raised in a particularly religious household, at least from an age I can remember. But my mom was in a community production of like a nativity play or something like that. And so she was at the church, a church somewhere, doing something, and I was sitting in the pews just like, how long is this going to take? And there was a Bible sitting in one of the little things on the back of the pew. So I flipped it open, started reading through it, was like, this is ridiculous. And there were some confusing things in there. Even the first time I read it, I was like, wait a minute, they said something different over here.
Sharp.
But so I was like for an hour sitting there just flipping through, and then when my mom got done, she was like, all right, let's go. I slapped it shut, put it down, and I didn't pick it up again until probably around the time I joined the church. I'd read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Quran, I'd read even some Shangsu, I think it's how it's pronounced, I don't know how it's pronounced. But I'd read a lot of different stuff, but the Bible I figured was a little too mainstream, I guess.
So true. It is very mainstream.
Yeah, you got to be getting in on the Gnostic Gospels.
You probably haven't heard of them.
I recently tried to read the Bhagavad Gita and kind of lost interest. There was this beautiful chapter about how this man couldn't possibly go to war against his brother, and then the very next chapter was like,
but what if
why
you
should though? What if you did? And I thought, damn it, this isn't going the way I wanted it to. Going back to the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah, it was so promising for a little bit. Yeah.
Kind of like in the Bible, if you had no context for where the story of Christ was going to go, you're like, this seems like a pretty cool guy. I hope nothing bad happens to him.
In 2020, 2021, somewhere around there, during the pandemic, we're all sitting inside. We're spending an inordinate amount of time on social media. And I'm seeing a lot of videos being shared from TikTok on like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook that are about the Bible and religion. And I thought TikTok was for teenagers dancing and for Korean kids to disrupt Republican presidential campaigns. And I was like, awesome, you do you. And but then I saw these videos and I was like, well, who's in charge over there? So I started, I don't even know if the kids say this anymore, but I started lurking over on TikTok, checking things out, and I saw there was a lot of different kind of social media communities. You had your deconstructionists and you had your atheists, and there's a lot of overlap there. And then you have your apologists, and you have a bunch of conspiracy theorists and all this kind of stuff. And I realized there weren't any credentialed experts for what I was seeing over there. And I thought, well, shoot, I might as well just kind of try and position myself in between a lot of these groups, not trying to hit for a specific team, but trying to set myself up as a bit of an umpire, somebody to call balls and strikes. And so that's how I tried to position myself. Mainly, I said I was there to combat the spread of misinformation about the academic study of the Bible and religion, and then also make more accessible the academic study of the Bible and religion, try to make people aware of open access scholarship, and then also try to kind of digest a lot of the more complex stuff and present it in a way that's a little easier for the public to understand. And I figured there wouldn't be an audience for that because I'd done it before on blogs, I'd done it before on message boards, and it was never the most popular take. The more controversial or the more apologetic takes were always getting a lot more attention. But to my surprise, I started to slowly gain a lot of attention, and then had some videos get 2 or 4.5 million views, and that was surprising and a little intimidating at first. And then I gained, maybe I think 1 week I got 10,000 followers, shortly after one of those videos, and that was a little more intimidating because suddenly the audience, the number of people out there had significantly increased, and the odds that somebody was in that audience who might know better than me grew significally as well. And so I was kind of like. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome in what I do, and I'm kind of particularly susceptible to that, just because for a lot of reasons. But I'm also trying to be a generalist. Like a lot of the videos I do aren't directly within my academic specialization. I've got to go do some research. I've got to read kind of summaries of what the academic consensuses are, and sometimes I've got to understand stuff that's well outside my field. And so I'm always scared that I'm going to get something wrong. And that somebody is going to slap me back down. But when that has happened, it's usually been folks who are incredibly kind about it and compassionate and know that I'm a non-specialist in a given area trying to do my best. And then I've always tried to also model the correctable behavior. Like I'm willing to be corrected, and if somebody corrects me, I will own it, I will apologize, I will do whatever I need to do to ensure that I don't make that same mistake again. And so I've tried to model that behavior as well. Luckily, that is rare, but it does happen. And these days, I'm happy to go out and apologize and correct myself. I'm glad for it, but surprisingly, an awful lot of people recognize that is an indication of someone who is critically, objectively, honestly approaching the data rather than somebody who's just there to defend a specific identity or ideology or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we just don't have enough examples of that, especially with you as an active member of the LDS Church. I mean, the way you've been able to stay seemingly just very true to what the truth is, I do find really impressive.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it seems like par for the course with academics that you have to correct yourself, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's I don't pretend to be free from dogmas or biases or anything like that, but I try to be pretty open about them. Like the bias I always will acknowledge is all other things being equal, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the less powerful group. There's always a bias with your own stuff. Like if I've published an opinion on something, I'm biased towards that opinion. It will hurt my feelings to be like, I was wrong about this thing that I dedicated so much of my life to and so much effort to. So obviously there are all kinds of biases and nobody can be perfect at it. But I think I'm getting better, and hopefully other folks can see that you don't have to be scared of getting canceled if you do something wrong. That in this industry, I think there's a lot of fear, and that's why a lot of people are not willing to acknowledge their error. There are a handful of folks who have a history with me on social media where they're really not willing to acknowledge that I'm right about something, and it's mainly because they've drawn such sharp lines. And their audience has drawn such sharp dogmatic lines where we're entirely right and they're entirely wrong, and so there's so much more at stake for them to do that. But for me, sometimes I get accused of trying to defend orthodoxy or something like that, which is just laughable.
That is laughable.
Yeah, there are no sacred cows for me. I'm willing to slaughter any of them, metaphorically speaking. But yeah, for some folks, they just can't give an inch, or else the whole project crumbles to the ground, or at least they seem to think that's going to happen. But that's one of the nice things about critical scholarship is you don't have any dogmatic commitments. I should be able to, and I feel like I ultimately could be able to let any claim go. Anything, if the data indicate that something is not right, you should be able to let it go. A lot of the people I argue with are very clearly not willing to let things go because they have so much invested in it and the stakes are so high.
I think that's why you're such a refreshing presence online, is for a lot of us, especially those who are coming out of religion and maybe have like a turbulent history in religion, to see someone whose approach is just like more curious than prescriptive of like, what are we, let's just try to figure out what's happening rather than starting out with a premise that we assume is true and defend at all costs.
Yeah.
And I think it's allowing people to engage in areas of faith from a more personally empowered standpoint, rather than just inheriting the myths and traditions that have been handed down, which are often, laced with bigotry and all that.
Yeah, there are so many power structures that are kind of embedded in a lot of those dogmas. And I think that is an asset. Because I came into religion as an adult, I didn't bring with it a lot of the conditioning that a lot of people who are raised in religion have embedded in their psyches. I mean, a lot of that is deeply embedded in their worldviews and how they understand themselves and their place in the world. And I kind of came in with a lot more curiosity. And I know that a lot of this is just chance. A lot of people do have that curiosity kind of disciplined out of them, but no one ever disabused me of any of my curiosity. So all the research I was doing was because I was curious. I wasn't really trying to defend a specific worldview because my, everything was, that was the foundation of everything I believed. I was genuinely just curious. I just came into this as an adult. There was a whole world out there ahead of me that I had not been exposed to, and I just wanted to know as much as I could about it. And so I think that's something that has kind of uniquely positioned me to be able to be more curious about stuff and to have a much shorter list of non-negotiables, as I would usually say.
That does seem like a privilege that you enjoy because, I was a convert as well to the LDS Church, but I quickly got into that very tightly wound, this is my perceived identity, and anything that threatens that in any way, like I could not cognitively handle it very easily. Maybe a bit better than someone who'd been raised in it. But yeah, it's like, what do you do if someone's just had their mental software wired that way? It's kind of tough to get them away from that style of thinking.
And I think that's why the whole deconstruction process is something that a lot of people are trying to learn about, and other people are trying to teach about, because it is a process. It's not just like flip a switch and everything goes away and everything's different now. You actually have to go sift through the things that you've learned and try to figure out which of this is built on reason and evidence and data, which is built on, the particular prejudices or biases of my parents or of the community, my specific community, and which is, coming down from central hierarchies. And there are all kinds of different sources, and there are all kinds of different ways that those things get embedded within people's kind of religious conditioning and worldviews. And so, yeah, it's complex, and because it's entangled with so many people's understandings of themselves, it's such an intimate, kind of personal, complex process to weed those things out. So I feel for people who are just starting off that process, who are deep in that process, who are scared of starting that process. And I can understand how people can see that hurdle and be like, I'm not going over that hurdle. I'm staying on this side, and I'm going to defend, not jumping over the hurdle like my life depends on it, because it can, so much crumbles around these people when their lives and their relationships are all built up on it. So, so I sympathize.
Is there messaging within the LDS Church, that sort of mainstream messaging, that you wish would flip or switch so that people aren't being wired that way so much? Yeah,
I think the church actually, since I joined the church, again, that was 2000. I think since the 80s and the 90s, there's been kind of a slow transition with a lot more transparency regarding primarily things like church history. I think there's been a lot of change there. There's still a long way to go, but I think there's been some great change in that regard. But I think a lot of the messaging tries to emphasize how important things are, and they use rhetoric that ends up causing unintended damage. When I first joined the church, one thing that I heard other people talking about, no one ever said it to me, obviously, because I'm a man, but like the whole licked cupcake, chewed gum kind of stuff. Oh, yeah. I mean, that, and people are trying to come up with folksy ways to help people understand how important these ideologies are, but they amplify the importance, and they make it binary and dichotomous and black and white so that it's easier to grasp, and so that it draws a sharper line that hopefully people won't cross. But the results can then be a lot of dehumanization and devaluation. And I remember sitting in, listening to a general conference, and I want to say it was President Hinckley, but I'm not positive. But somebody got up at the pulpit and talked about a story of someone going off to war and telling them that they knew their mom would prefer they come home in a box than unclean. Yep. And I remember thinking, what an awful parent to tell a child, I would rather you be dead than unclean, because there's going to be a percentage of children who are going to be unclean according to that standard, and you're telling them that they're not worth living, that they are better off dead. And we have had people who go take their lives, or go through such deep trauma that they spend the rest of their lives trying to disentangle from. It's so harmful to try to use that kind of rhetoric and try to amplify that rhetoric just to try to prevent kids from, experimenting with this, that, or the other. It does far more harm than it does good, and unfortunately have tried to explain that to people in different parts of the congregations I've been a part of, and broader congregations, and there's such an opposition to even trying to acknowledge or understand the reality of that situation that I despair of some people ever actually grasping the harm that kind of rhetoric can do. But yeah, I think I see less and less of that kind of rhetoric, that kind of messaging from the church, but it's still there in a variety of ways. And there are still parents, and there are still bishops, and there are still stake presidents who will share that rhetoric or similar rhetoric because it's what they grew up with. So that kind of stuff, I think, is going to take a long time.
Do you just see the Sunday school teacher start sweating when you walk into class?
I know, nightmare for them.
No, how did they take you?
So I was the gospel doctrine teacher for the Old Testament year, but that was mainly because I think the people who had been in there for the previous year were like, yeah, we're out.
Yeah,
I mean, imagine calling anyone else.
He's just there, let's see it.
Well, and they knew that that I had consulted on the writing of the manual for the Come Follow Me manual for that year. So I think it was the first or second week of class. I was sitting in Sunday school in the back of the room, and one of the bishopric comes in and looks kind of rushed and comes over to me, and they're like, "Hey, person who was supposed to teach today isn't here. You think you could teach?" I was like, "Oh, in 30 seconds?" Yeah. Got it. And went up and I thought taught a wonderful lesson entirely off the cuff. But just like it was a few weeks after that, they called me to take over. But then they called someone else to teach every other week. We were trading off, and this was a wonderful person in our ward who I think does a good job. Is obviously not an expert in this kind of stuff, but yeah, there's if I'm in the Sunday school class, there is an awful lot of, "Hey Dan, what about this?" And just checking to make sure that's right, Dan. And so that happens. But I always have to wonder what the new people in the ward, when they come sit in a gospel doctrine, and a former member of the bishopric is up there teaching gospel doctrine, and every once in a while somebody will be like, "We need to check with Dan."
Dr. Dan McClellan.
This idiot over here wearing a pink shirt or something like that.
Well, that's encouraging that they called you to teach and not called you to repentance.
Yeah. I wish you'd been in our gospel doctrine class when we were deconstructing this. People were not interested in our comments.
Well, it was an interesting process because I heard from a number of people that, well, one, the makeup of the gospel doctrine class changed. When I was teaching, there were people there who normally would not attend, and then there were other people who would normally attend who wouldn't be there. And then when I wasn't teaching, the composition was different. But I heard from a number of people who said they never felt comfortable in gospel doctrine, but if I was teaching, they would go there and they would learn things, and they would know that it was a safe place. So I don't think a lot of folks are aware that kind of thing goes on, because the people won't go announce, "Hey, I don't feel like this is a safe place, so I'm not attending." They just won't attend, and nobody will know why. So, so that was an interesting peek under the hood of some of the kind of attendance dynamics.
Well, I've always said, if every Latter-day Saint had been and were and ever would be like unto Dan McClellan.
He does always say that.
What are, in your studies and responses, what are some things that most Christians or religious people get wrong about the Bible? And then on the flip side, what do you find most non-religious people getting wrong about the Bible?
There are three dogmas that I always call out when it comes to the Bible, that folks who treat the Bible as an authoritative, inspired text, these three dogmas, I think, cloud their judgment. One is inspiration, that every last part of the text is inspired, which leads to the notion of inerrancy and also leads to the notion of univocality. And I think univocality is the one that people are the least aware of, that they don't realize they're doing this because it's so deeply embedded in the way that we have socially thought and talked about the Bible, this notion that it all agrees with itself. And so, somebody could say, well, there's this passage in Genesis, and somebody would say, well, what about this passage in Revelation? And even people who are not religious, even people who are critical of religion, will frequently adopt that perspective when arguing with people who treat the Bible as inspired. This notion that you're basically trying to construct this worldview, this singular unified perspective that is presented by the whole Bible, when the reality is that there are texts that frequently disagree and directly contradict each other. That is just a bridge too far for so many people. And I think when people are exposed to how much of our conventional wisdom about the Bible and interpretations about the Bible are propped up entirely on a foundation of those presuppositions, when you take them away, I think people are surprised how much falls to the ground. And which is why a lot of the folks who want to defend the inerrancy, the inspiration, the univocality of the Bible really don't like me, get really upset with my, I get comments every single day about how I'm satanic, about how
Oreo eater, this guy.
There are people get inordinately upset with me about some of this stuff, and it's because I think they recognize that approaching the Bible from a data-based perspective is such a threat to so many worldviews. On the non-religious or anti-religious side of things, I think the thing that frustrates me the most is the idea that the Bible is not worth understanding or studying. And certainly if somebody doesn't want themselves to do that, that's fine, obviously. But people tell me all the time that, they're like, you might as well get a degree in Harry Potter. It's like, well, if Harry Potter had been around for 2,000 years and had been the single most influential text that has ever existed, and that laws in countries, including our own and other countries around the world, frequently were based on the text, and people's lives depended on how people interpreted those texts, it would be important to study Harry Potter. But right now, the Bible is that text, and so the notion that it is, that there's no value in trying to understand or study the Bible on its own terms, as well as understanding the terms that Bible believers set for it, is just asinine. That's just monumentally stupid to think that there's no value in better understanding where the Bible came from and how it's being used. And that's precisely what I've set out to study, is how people interpret the Bible, why, how they deploy the Bible as a tool for structuring power and values and boundaries and things like that. And I think that's going to be incredibly useful as we have Christian nationalism becoming more and more salient, as we have more and more legislation that is being patterned on particular dogmas about the Bible, particular interpretations about the Bible. We have this new law in Louisiana. The 10 Commandments have to be on display in every public classroom, and it's a specific translation, a very idiosyncratic translation of the 10 Commandments that comes from a group that was responsible for developing the movie The 10 Commandments way back in the 50s
Cecil
and 60s.
DeMille.
He was a part of it, yeah, and also the notion that the 10 Commandments are sit at the foundation of any state or any federal code of laws is something that that kind of begun as they were trying to gin up interest in this, and it's all and a lot of it comes from the Red Scare and red baiting and all that kind of stuff, and it's an entirely different situation now, but they're still using the same language, the same rhetoric, all the same tools and everything. But like if we don't understand the Bible, and we don't understand what these commandments are about, and we don't understand the relationship of these commandments to the foundation of our country, or the lack of any relationship, that's going to be a problem. This is going to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has already been influenced by these right-wing authoritarian activist justices who have overturned the high scrutiny that has been placed on some of these First Amendment claims, and now they just have to show that something is part of our tradition, our nation's tradition, in order to get over the hurdle of the First Commandment. And so if it gets to the Supreme Court, almost certainly they're going to allow for it, which means so many other states are immediately going to pass the same legislation. Yeah, this is going to become a far bigger problem in the future. And so I think it's increasingly important that we understand what the Bible is, where it came from, how it's being used, how it's being misused, how it's being misunderstood. To answer the question, that's the main thing that I see from a and even anti-religious perspective that frustrates me.
I like how you mentioned at the beginning that obviously it's fine if someone isn't personally that interested in studying the Bible, because I do feel like a lot of people who maybe were raised in Christianity and had the Bible be shoved down their throats in various ways. I think it can be healthy to just let yourself detach from it.
Oh, absolutely.
Once you deconstruct, but I'm glad there are people like you making those of us who are less inclined to want to study the Bible at least be like taking in some knowledge and useful information.
Yeah, I think it's such a shame that so many bad actors have made the Bible a source of trauma for so many people, but then are also making it something that is ever present in the broader public discourse, and re-traumatizing people all the time because they see it as this weapon, this tool for structuring power and values and boundaries.
I do love how much your focus has been not just on dissecting and understanding the Bible, but also its social and political implications. You've also ran for various political offices, which it's a shame we weren't there. We would just be, if you ever run again.
Devoted our YouTube channel to the cause.
We'll be the Dan McClellan for election channel.
Yeah, that was 2018. I ran for the Utah State House, and then 2020 I ran for the Utah State Senate. But I live in Harriman. It's a deep red district. I had a 50-point deficit to make up on the first one, a 40-point deficit to make up on the second. I think I took 16 plus points off of both middle-aged white men. So I was trying to move the needle a little bit. I think I succeeded in doing that. The first person I ran against retired the next time around, and then the second person I ran against, I think might be retiring soon, if I recall correctly.
Are you saying you might run again?
I don't have plans at the moment. I'm having too much fun on social media. Yeah, so politics is a weird industry.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about it. Just like I kind of hopped into social media without knowing much about it, I hopped into politics without knowing a ton about it. I spent a couple years as a precinct chair for the Democratic Party here in Utah. Once I saw just how prevalent Trumpism was becoming in 2016, and I was like, I can't just sit on the sidelines. I'm raising 3 daughters in this world. I cannot just be like, I'm out, and give them a world that has always given me everything, but will, deny everything to them. So I decided I needed to commit to that. And now I think I found a way that I can use my experiences and my expertise to hopefully pierce a little deeper into the heart of the powers that be that are causing so much trouble. But I won't rule anything out.
Well, yeah, you're doing a great job now of disseminating information that is helping change the public discourse and ideas around all this stuff. So
yeah,
I'm sure you have a lot more power in that sense.
I think I definitely have a lot more, a much farther reach.
Yeah.
Much more influence now. But it's been, a lot of the reason that I can kind of wed these two fields is because first I went into cognitive linguistics as a part of research I was doing for my second master's thesis to try to understand how people use words to mean things. And from there, I transitioned into the cognitive science of religion and started studying, where religious belief comes from, how it operates, and how deeply entangled with our identity politics religion is. And that has kind of opened my eyes. That has kind of made these two fields kind of overlap significantly. And seeing that overlap is what's made me very concerned for the direction that a lot of things are going, and made me want to use this platform not just to try to help make academic study of the Bible more accessible, but also to combat the spread of misinformation, particularly as it relates to power structures, politics, things like that. Because I grew up being taught that the people who make our laws and the people who run our executive offices on local and state and federal levels, that these were just the best of the best and wonderful people. And the more I got to know state legislators, the more I was like, I am embarrassed at the level of ignorance, of selfishness, of just pure
collabing with doTERRA during the pandemic.
like seeing the lies, the idiocy of some people who hold positions of power in state and in federal governments. And I've lived in other countries. I've visited dozens and dozens of other countries. I've seen how their governments function and how their elected officials and sometimes appointed officials operate. And it's like, man, we are really no better off, and in some cases much worse off than a lot of different parts of the world.
Oh, yeah.
And particularly with state legislatures. They are an embarrassment to me as just a middle-aged adult American. How pathetic some of our state legislatures are.
Oh yeah, I all the time, just as like lurking on social media, I'm like, I pity the fool who goes up against Dan McClellan. First of all, if you're trying to argue, like, good luck, first of all, and I appreciate how kind you are, just as like a mode of operation where you actively encourage people, not to dogpile people or to make ad hominem attacks. But I have such a delight when I see you call a senator a doofus or something. I'm like, yeah, Dan,
You're
let
punch
loose.
up.
I decided on Twitter that that's the one name I would allow myself to call people, just because it's it's a harmless
Dan
name.
can call people doofuses as a treat.
But I also think it fits. Like a lot of the rhetoric that I'm seeing, it's like, this is middle school level rhetoric, so I'm going to call you a middle school name because it's fitting.
Yes.
You doofus. The responses, they do nothing but confirm just how unfit for public office so many people are in our state particularly, but in other states like Louisiana, like Texas, like a lot of the other states where people who have no business running anything any more complex than a lemonade stand are have access to these levers of power.
My cleat. It becomes apparent that people are being intentionally obtuse, that they do not even want to understand. It's not even about understanding. It's, as you always say, how to maintain structures of power and identity.
Yeah.
And that just becomes so clear. in every conversation I witnessed you having with elected officials.
Somebody's been posting on social media this morning. There must have been a debate last night or a couple nights ago in Colorado. I don't know if it's people running against Lauren Boebert, but it was a debate with a bunch of Republicans, and whoever was moderating was just so good. Because they were asking them very specific questions, and none of them would address the questions at all. And they wouldn't let them get away with it. They would interrupt them. They'd stop them. They'd be like, "This is the question," or bring up, you were arrested for this, and you were caught telling the police officer that they should, keep this out of the public, and you were caught trying to bribe them, and now you're running to be a legislator, and you don't think that is disqualifying, and then. Showing them just kind of be and not know what to say was.
They weren't like, actually, now we can have a felon as a president, and it's actually pretty good.
Yeah. Oh gosh. And then we get the people whose immediate response is, "Oh, I worship a convicted felon," as a way to try to rehabilitate this idea that we have a convict. You can't own a gun if you're a convicted felon. Why should you be in charge? You can't be in the military if you're a convicted felon. Why should you be able to be in charge of the entire military?
Yes.
If you're
Nuclear
a convicted
code.
Not
felon?
even be in the military.
Yeah, but even beyond that, a man as just objectively stupid and incompetent as Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I am very ashamed of some of the folks in my community who supported him. And I don't think a lot of people know just how frightening it was for a lot of people who have been victims of sexual assault to realize that was not disqualifying for the most powerful position on the face of the earth to people who are their neighbors, people who watched their kids, people who sat in pews in church with them. I don't think people realize just how traumatizing that was for a lot of people. It really was, this is not disqualifying. It's okay with me that this man is legally liable for rape, boasted about being able to sexually assault women with impunity, has talked about, sexualizing his own daughter and all this kind of stuff. What a disgusting human being. There's just no excuse for thinking he should be in charge of the U.S. government. It's so pathetic.
Amen.
From a political party that so often uses sort of made up risk of sexual assault from certain minority groups as justification for their bigotry.
Yeah, trans people lurking in the bathroom.
God, and
that
they've
are
even just rehabilitated, they just turned Trump into, no, he's actually a crusader fighting the pedophiles. And not only is he not a sexual abuser, he's taken them all down. You can just subvert anything and then it's fine. It's got to be frustrating for you, encountering people that are genuinely just not interested in truth and are not, approaching, for example, the Bible in good faith. Because where can you really go with that? I feel like mine and Tanner's general approach or perspective is that's why you just have to keep treating people kindly and with respect so that you at least potentially can have there be a doorway. But
yeah, I think it would be, a lot of us hold out this hope that we can use facts and data and things like that to overcome dogma. But the problem with dogma is it's not based on facts and data. It's based on a lot of intuitive cognition. And here we get back to the cognitive science of religion. Everybody understands themselves and the world around them and their place within it based on this spectrum of cognition. And on one end, we have intuitive cognition, which is subconscious, which is innate. It's installed there either by evolution or by our experiences. And then on the other side, we have what we call reflective cognition, which is slower, it's more intentional, we have control over it. And those things come in conflict a lot. So for instance, if somebody hear a noise in the middle of the night, maybe initially there's a shock, but suddenly that's the air conditioning kicking in or something like that. That is the initial kind of scared response, that is that intuitive cognition, but then the reflective cognition immediately overrules it. For different kinds of perceptions and senses and thinking, there's the threshold where intuitive gives into the reflective is different. But a lot of people, their identity politics are a part of their intuitive cognition. And so they want to feel good about themselves, they want to feel good about the social identities that are important to them, and they want to advance their standing within those social identities. And that is overwhelmingly, I think, what governs a lot of the ways people think about political and social issues, is how that affects my understanding of myself, my social identities, and my position within those social identities. And so it's not even conscious. It is their subconscious mind kind of at the wheel, at the levers, controlling things, and then the reflective cognition just comes in to defend it. And so it's kind of like if there are people on Twitter, like you see a post from Donald Trump, like I immediately am like, what did this idiot say now? And if it's not something that's immediately apparent to me why it's bad, I might be like, something's bad about this. There's got to be something bad about this. And that's my intuitive cognition telling me this guy's a moron. He can barely read. Obviously, something's wrong with this. But, the reflective side has to come in and be like, slow your roll, take it easy. Maybe this doesn't have to be something bad. And, there are people that never allow that reflective side to pop up, to take control, and will just lean into everything so-and-so says is bad, whether it's Biden or Trump or some, Mike Lee or somebody like that. All of us, to one degree or another, are just engaged in trying to protect our self-image and our social standing and the social identities that are important to us. And that's the reason that I think we get embedded in these kind of ruts and defend these positions.
I'd say for Christians, it's also especially difficult because, and I know there's like analogous phenomenon in other religions, but the concept of the Holy Spirit that I think often gets muddled with that intuitive cognition,
Yeah.
where it's like anything that I feel is reflective of reality.
Right, and you get that a lot particularly within the Latter-day Saint churches, or the Latter-day Saint Church, the Mormon churches, but also within broader Christianity, this notion that this is God telling me something, or that I think for Latter-day Saints, it's a little more programmatic, that's what it is. But yeah, it certainly exists, and you can't overrule that with data. I think there's been a lot of research that shows that if people have their defenses up when it comes to identity politics, things that are going to get them down are either one, close personal relationships with people, or personal experiences that challenge their dogmas. And absent of those, a list of facts on Twitter isn't going to do anything. They're going to respond to it how they're used to responding to it.
Yeah, because isn't it true that the more fear is present in someone, or I'd say shame as well, the less their cognitive functioning is working well. Like if you're in a fear state, you're not going to be doing your best critical thinking.
Right.
Which is why so many high control groups and authoritarian leaders use fear and shame as a control mechanism.
Yeah.
And it's tough because if you're interacting with people who have just been wired for shame, which is essentially like fear, their whole lives, and that's just their default state. Like, yeah, the only doorway in is going to be kindness and respect and showing them that you're not a threat. But I think something that me and Tanner have even experienced lately is like people being so outraged at the idea that you would befriend someone who has an idea that you think is harmful, for example, because in some way you're endorsing it or, minimizing its harm.
Yeah. The purity tests are frequently identity markers because one of the reasons these things exist is so that you can tell if someone else can be trusted. Like we can go all the way back to before Homo sapiens exist, and you rove around in little bands of usually hereditary or usually kin-based groups. It's your family. You know who it is. You know you can trust them. You see somebody you don't know whether or not you can trust them. And these social institutions and rituals develop so that you can say, oh, this person does the right thing, says the right thing. I know I can trust them. They are willing to incur costs to signal to me that they are, faithful to the group's mores, standards, whatever. And we have a bunch of rituals that function that way today. Shaking hands, making eye contact. This is one of the reasons that autistic people frequently come across as very antisocial and stuff like that, is because they're intuitively, they're not hardwired to kind of make those, that signaling that most other folks are. So with any group, whether conservative or progressive or anything like that, we have we have an idea of who can be trusted and who can't, and we have ways that we determine if you can be trusted or not. So, there are a lot of folks on. This is something we've seen a lot recently on TikTok. People will call out other TikTokers because they haven't said enough about Palestine or something like that. They will take that as an identity marker, and that means that you can no longer be trusted. And so everybody does that to one degree or another, and I think a lot of people aren't aware that that's what they're doing is trying to create boundaries around who can be trusted and who can't, and they're just trying to curate those boundaries. And so, yeah, unfortunately, it can cause a lot of damage because it can mean, oh, we need to retreat to our battle lines, and we need to treat everybody else as an enemy, and we need to be hostile towards other folks when that is not what's going to ultimately break down those defenses that will allow them to be reached with the data. And unfortunately, there's an argument to make for both sides of that, because sometimes that does work, most of the time it doesn't. And sometimes the trying to maintain relationships of trust with other people does work, and again, most of the time it doesn't. So there's an argument to make from both sides of those. But yeah, that's definitely one of the unfortunate side effects of the way that we are conditioned and we have evolved to curate social identities.
It's definitely something I've been reflecting on a lot lately, and more so as time goes on, is how I'm communicating about the things that I care about. Because even, if you have a noble intention, like speaking out about Palestine or something, am I going about it in a way that's actually going to facilitate the result that I want, or am I doing it in a way that subverts my own intention by making the person closed off to whatever it is that I have to say?
Yeah.
And something that we've talked a lot about politics and things, and, the rise of Christian fascism and Christian nationalism is a very looming threat to me. And to me, I'm like, now's not the time to just retreat into our Puritanism and things. Like, now more than ever, we need to be building bridges with people who may have some ideas that are contradictory to us, or that we might even find harmful. But trying to find that middle ground, I think, does ultimately help reduce the impact of those. Or if it will, that's the only thing that will.
Yeah.
I think people have a hard time just accepting the fact that their outrage alone isn't going to produce many tangible effects.
Yeah.
And it's because they can't sit with that grief, or just the fact that you can only ever really plant seeds, and there's no guarantee you're going to get the desired outcome you want. You have to be able to sit with that uncertainty, and I think we're bad at that. So we just the more mad I am, the more righteous I'm being.
Well, and in a lot of ways, it functions as what cognitivists call a credibility-enhancing display. It's a way to show off to others just how faithful and committed you are to the group's standards and everything. And so it's a way to increase your own standing within the group. If you are just outraged that somebody is not supportive enough of Donald Trump, or not supportive enough of this progressive movement or that conservative movement, that's a way to just put on display and say to everybody else, no, I'm really, really committed to the group, guys. You should really trust me. But yeah, I think so many people are aiming for an outright, unilateral win, and that's never going to happen. We're never going to defeat the other side. It's never going to be, they're not all going to suddenly convert to your cause. They're always going to be there. And, everyone who's seen Stranger Things, halfway happy is sometimes the only way that anybody is going to get to be happy. Otherwise, we have so many people who are just insistent that the other side must be defeated. And not only is that just not a possibility, nobody wants to live in a world that's just authoritarianism, where your worldview has to be stamped out, because ultimately that's going to end up meaning you have to be stamped out. Because and when it comes to things like white supremacy and things like that, anti-Semitism, those are horrific worldviews that need to be minimized to the degree we can. But there's also the question of liberty and freedom, and we become the thought police once we say that any manifestation of that or any existence of that thing has to be ground to dust, because ultimately that means the people who are doing it have to do that. And I don't want to live in a world where that exists. I can hate and disrespect those ideologies. Yeah, I know. It's upsetting.
He hates white supremacy.
Cats against white supremacy.
We're never going to totally stamp out all the bad things that are a part of our society. That doesn't mean we need to compromise with things like anti-Semitism and white supremacy. But I think it means, we don't have to dehumanize. We don't have to try to legislate out of existence the people who are caught in that. Again, I think we need to be compassionate towards people who have been raised in situations where that's the only world they've known, and they've been conditioned to see any other world as a threat or something like that. I think that.
Yes, being able to separate the person from the belief. Because if you treat people like they are their beliefs, they cling to them as if that's their identity.
And they're just going to dig their heels in.
Yeah.
We always cite the insight of Carl Jung. I think that's like a big part of his philosophy, that like that is evil, is that unconsciousness that projects darkness onto other people, that says, you're so evil because of these things you believe, because of these groups you belong to, therefore I'm justified in enacting violence against you.
Yeah.
And that is always the catalyst for violent action. That's why genocides happens, because, this evil group of people that's, deteriorating our national standards and values, they need to be rounded up and kicked out or killed. Like, it's always that, right? We don't beat that by just becoming more brutal and forceful in our approach to them.
Yeah.
We have to show a better way.
Agreed.
Are you? Have you explored Carl Jung much?
Not too much. There are some features of the cognitive sciences that try to look at ways that evolution and the universal experiences of growing up human result in kind of consistent cognitive frameworks that can sometimes seem to overlap with ideas about archetypes. So there is a little bit of overlap in that sense, but Jungianism is a different discipline. And no, I haven't done a ton of deep dives into that.
Well, we just read the highlights, so it's all the secondhand. All right, well, we got a little test for you. Test your knowledge of the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Sure.
Are we doing the picture round first?
We're doing a little picture round.
We're starting with the visual round.
We got Dan in the hot seat, and we're going to prove his knowledge of the Bible. I'm going to show you a character from the Bible.
Okay.
And you tell me who it is. We'll start with an easy one. Who's that?
That's Carl Jung.
Oh, you got it.
Okay, we got Jesus.
Ooh, you were so close. This is actually the thief that was crucified
the thief
next to
next to Jesus.
Jesus.
Okay.
So
In
zero
the
for
ballpark,
one.
though, in the ballpark.
Yeah, you got it. It was just right next. Okay.
Oh gosh. That could be any one of a number of figures from either the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament. I'm going to say that's Paul.
Wow, give it up. Nice.
But you were right when you said that could be any number of people, because it was kind of just a fluid Bible general.
All right, who's this?
Again, that could be any one of a number of people who it seems like you're pushing in the
Any of
direction
the women in the Bible?
So it seems like it could be any one of a number of people who is advertising certain wares, a sex worker perhaps. So somebody like Rahab, somebody like even I think it was Tamar with Judah. It would not be Mary Magdalene, because Mary Magdalene was never a sex worker.
That's just a myth.
That is a myth that was created in 591 CE by Pope Gregory the Great in a homily that he was giving on forgiveness. And he conflated a few different characters from Luke and John and decided to identify them all as Mary Magdalene and identify the many sins of this conglomeration of women as sexual sin. And what's the worst kind of sexual sin? Sex working. So Mary Magdalene was a sex worker. And it was an awful exegetical move that has caused irreparable harm to Mary Magdalene's tradition, her reputation. No, I'm wondering who this was intended.
Well, we were also wondering. We didn't know. We
Just
thought you could help us figure
Any
it
general
out.
whore in the Bible. Tana didn't want me to put the words juicy, but I was like, we have to put the words juicy on her top. Oh, was that Pope the guy who came up with the 7 deadly sins, or like made them?
I feel like that was a longer term development, but certainly that was a
Okay.
part of it, yeah.
As we're speaking about Mary Magdalene, and just to preface this question, I'm like, know almost nothing about the thing I'm about to ask you, but I wanted to ask you about the Gnostic Gospels and your thoughts on those being sidelined
Can I just insert too, kind of as we're talking about this, and like the development of myths generally, and I don't say that disparagingly about the Bible. It just, to me, it is just a myth in the way that another. Yeah. Anyway, how myths comes to be and how we distinguish, how we draw the value from that without conflating, ideas that have been added onto or mixed in with all this, and what like in terms of like the Gnostic Gospels, where those get separated into a different category. Why do we distinguish? How do we distinguish? What's authoritative or helpful?
I think there are a lot of scholars these days who would point out that the notion that what is original is better is a dogma in and of itself that shouldn't be governing how we interrogate and analyze the development of religious traditions. But the Gnostic traditions are a product of taking a middle Platonist worldview and kind of overlaying it on Judaism and Christianity and retelling the creation myth of Judaism within that framework. And according to this middle Platonism, the world of the flesh is kind of a corrupt world, and our bodies are fleshly prisons of our divine spirits, which long to escape those prisons and ascend to the pleroma, the fullness, which is where we can enjoy the divine nature. When you overlay that on the Bible, you reinterpret the creation of the material world as a problem, as something that was done by somebody who did not have the best interests of our spirits in mind. And so the God of the Hebrew Bible, Adonai, gets recast as the villain, as a kind of JV squad deity that wants to create these prisons for these divine spirits so that they will worship him. And there's a bunch of different stuff that grows out of this retelling of the creation myth. And so in this telling, the Hebrew Bible is bad. Jesus is here to try to educate people on the knowledge that is necessary to free your spirit from this fleshly prison. And there are a bunch of variations on it, and I'm not an expert on the different variations on Gnosticism. But when that tradition starts spreading, you get a lot of different texts that are kind of riffing on what we find in the canonical Gospels and other traditions that were likely in circulation alongside of them. And you get a lot of the Gnostic literature, but it's also not there's not a clear dividing line between the two. You have a lot of debates about what is Gnostic, what isn't. The Gospel of Thomas seems to have some Gnostic influences, but in other ways it is not very Gnostic. The Gospel of Mary, which never explicitly is about Mary Magdalene, but is just a gospel about Mary, almost certainly Mary Magdalene, doesn't have any of the Gnostic creation myth in it. So some people say, well, it's not Gnostic, but we're missing most of it as well. So it's kind of a category with fuzzy boundaries, and there's also a lot of pluriformity within the core of the tradition. So the texts that we traditionally identify as Gnostic are certainly less historical than some of the other traditions, including what we have in the canonical Gospels, but they're also not historical. The Gospel of John, for instance, has very little in it that scholars would say descends from historical events. The Synoptic Gospels have a little bit more in them that probably is a kind of a gist memory that maybe goes back to the life of Jesus or just shortly after the life of Jesus. So to say that like there's something, the canonical Gospels have something special about them, or they are all historical, and then all the other stuff, the apocryphal, the pseudepigraphical, the Gnostic literature is all entirely ahistorical, would be to misrepresent both categories. But there's a spectrum of what falls closer to what Jesus's life and teachings most likely were. And the Gnostic stuff tends to be a little further away from that. But it's not as clear a dichotomy as I think people on both sides of the line sometimes would like it to be.
Before the Bible came together and they decided, okay, this is the stuff we're going to put in the Bible, is it fair to say that narratives that were more, quote unquote, feminine, or that didn't uphold like the patriarchy in the same sort of way, were excluded?
I think it's fair to say that it came to be more like that, more programmatically like that, probably between like the 4th and the 6th century CE. But before that, I think it would have been different. We see evidence even within like Romans and other Pauline literature of women holding ecclesiastical positions of ecclesiastical authority, and it's certain that there were women who were funding a lot of Christian congregations and activities, and we even have some archaeological data, some inscriptions, some iconography and stuff like that that refers to women as having positions of ecclesiastical authority. And you know, this was even occurring within a highly patriarchal society. The Greco-Roman world was highly patriarchal, but there was even a way that Christianity could escalate that, which probably really started to take over between the 4th and the 6th centuries. As Rome takes over the church, I think there was probably a push towards away from historical Christianity's reputation for being a religion of women and slaves towards, well, if this is the official religion of the Roman Empire, and then the only religion allowed in the Roman Empire, they kind of adopted the far more strictly patriarchal hierarchy and organization.
Charlemagne kind of jumped the shark, kind of bad point.
What do you think about the way women are represented in the Bible generally? Like, do you just see the, I suppose, lack of representation, or the, how it is? Is that just a product of the way the Bible came to be, and that men held the pet? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
Again, it was a highly patriarchal world. I think that there were very strict social roles that everybody was confined to. And certainly men were higher up on the social hierarchy than women. The Bible represents women in a lot of ways exploiting their social roles to get what they needed from the society. So Judah and Tamar, for instance. She marries one of Judah's sons. He dies before she has a child. So levirate marriage, Judah's other sons have to marry her, have children with her so that the line can carry on. And we have the story of Onan in Genesis 38, where he engages in coitus interruptus because the son would be considered the son of his brother and not his own, and there are also economic things involved. And so he gets killed by God for that. And then Judah is not going to give her his other son so that she can conceive and have a kid. And so she takes matters into her own hands. He goes away on a business trip. She dresses up as a sex worker on the side of the road. And he is, coming, sees her, decides to patronize her business. And she is impregnated and later on reveals to Judah who she was, and he says, "Oh, well, you good one, you got me," and basically says, "Yeah, you did better than me. I didn't want to give you my son because probably because he thought he would die as well." But she goes out of her way to exploit her position in her social role to get what she needed from the social institutions. And so the Bible represents women doing that in a number of ways, but never challenges the social roles or the social conventions. We have like Deborah in Judges 4 and 5 as a judge, is basically a general. It's commanding armies and defeating the Canaanites with their general Sisera. And there's even the Song of Deborah, maybe one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible, that is championing her skills and abilities as a general. So they do go outside those roles, or at least our understanding of those roles in a handful of instances. But for the most part, it's usually women operating within the limited roles that they have available to them, and sometimes in exemplary ways and in ways that show that they're more righteous or they can stick to the social standards better than the men around them.
Well, we see a lot of Christian influencers these days talking about biblical womanhood. What is biblical womanhood? Is there a standard, even a consistent standard in the Bible for women? Do you think that the Bible is a good representation of the Christian deity's perspective on how women should be?
No, there's no consistent position, but any position you can identify with within any particular segment of text is just going to reflect a specific social value. So if you're looking in the Hebrew Bible, whatever biblical womanhood is just a reflection of a specific social group in a specific social setting. When you look in the New Testament, now suddenly you've got the Greco-Roman household as kind of the governing framework. So in every instance, it's just whatever the social conventions of the time were, there's a specific social group that is going to represent their particular take on those conventions as what, the way things are supposed to be, which means they're socially contingent. They don't transcend the social circumstances. And then right now, it's just groups trying to leverage the authority of the Bible to authorize their own particular social conventions as the ones that are authorized by God. And then they just say, oh, well, that's biblical womanhood because they want their particular socially embedded and contingent position to be the one that God wanted all along. So it's just a way to try to leverage the Bible as the authority, even though they are trying to reread the Bible to fit their own perspective.
So I feel like that's kind of been, at least in my perception, the main approach to the Bible as like a prescriptive, authoritative text.
Yeah.
And we don't get a lot of alternatives to that, I feel like. Usually it's people like, this is what the Bible says, so this is therefore how history was, how the creation was, how things will be in the future.
Right.
Always, never, even though we see examples throughout the Bible of change and relativism among groups and authors, etc. What's your vision for the role that Christianity could play in a less dogmatic, more academic or curious approach to the Bible?
I think Christianity has to divest itself of its concern for power. If Christianity can do that, then I think it can lead out as an example. But I think that's a bridge too far for the majority of Christians because Christianity in so many different ways is primarily a movement of power. That's how it became, if Christianity did not take over the Roman Empire, then it probably would have died out like so many other religious traditions did. And it didn't take over the Roman Empire because that was inevitable or because of the values of Christianity. It took over the Roman Empire because of some historical incidents and accidents. And so it's been exploited for almost 2,000 years for the ways that it can facilitate structuring of power and values and boundaries. And so that's kind of embedded in the foundation of Christianity. So that's a big hurdle for Christianity to get over. But there have been a lot of folks who have approached it that way. Liberation theology, I think, is a phenomenal manifestation of the Christian spirit that has helped a lot of marginalized, minoritized, and oppressed groups find not just deliverance, but a means out of a lot of different ways that they've been minoritized and marginalized and oppressed through Christianity. Unfortunately, that also because that threatens the power structures and it creates fuzzier boundaries, it's a problem for those who see Christianity as a tool for power. And institutions also, there's so many institutions embedded within Christianity, and institutions like power. They like very clear boundaries. They like to know who's in, who's out. And so that is a threat to institutions as well. So it doesn't look good for Christianity. But I think there are so many people within Christianity out there who would love to see that and are fighting for that I think there's a lot of good that can and will be done by Christians who are trying to advance that worldview over and against the worldview of power.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even a straight reading of the Bible, you have Jesus saying, "My kingdom's not of this world." Like, you see him always extending compassion to the people outside of the cultural norms, people at the margins of society. That seems just so obvious from just first read of the Bible to me that and I feel like, again, just my experience with people I've met who have left Christianity, usually their beef isn't like, oh, I hate Jesus. It's loved everything Jesus said, hate the way that it's being leveraged, that the story's being used to bully people, to exclude people, to, et cetera, et cetera. But then you get people like, Zizek, who's this radical communist, most dangerous philosopher of the West, who's advocating atheist Christianity, recognizing that there's something to it. There's the purity, when you remove all the myths and stories and institutions that have been erected around it, that there's something truly revolutionary in its core.
Yeah. There were a lot of deists who approached Christianity that way, like Thomas Jefferson going through and cutting out all of the miracles and all the stuff that didn't agree with kind of a natural religion approach. And I think Christianity has had the benefit of kind of being there when there were a lot of philosophical and social strides being made. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment. Christianity just happened to be the kind of governing framework, and so Christianity has kind of adopted a lot of that progress, and a lot of people today try to claim it as Christianity's when it really was often it was occurring in spite of what was going on within the institutional church structures. But yeah, there's Zizek is such an interesting character.
He comes up every video.
He does,
yeah.
It's all Dan and Zizek.
It's Dan, Terrence McKenna, and Zizek at this point.
But yeah, I think there are some phenomenal moral and philosophical insights that Christianity could facilitate. But yeah, because for so many people it's all about power. I think that's going to get in the way for the majority of folks who identify as Christians. And, that's what they're trying to do right now with the whole 10 Commandments in the classroom thing. That's just an identity marker. That's just putting, the image of the emperor in the room, in the public space, so that people know whose space this is. And in spite of all of the rationalizations and all of the attempts to turn it into something other than that, it's just identity politics.
Amen. From my view, the Bible has become the great idol of Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
To me, it's like, Jesus never was like, hey, you need to write a Bible. Make sure you write everything down, and it's gonna explain the world for universally for the rest of existence. Everything's here. Like, that's never just been said. It was just people who did it, who wrote down the stories and passed them along and made up traditions. And it's not to say that there couldn't possibly have been a divine intent there or whatever, but it definitely seems like a huge stumbling block for a lot of people just because of all the false conceptions around it.
Yeah. I think it's all, whether it's the written word, the traditions that are getting passed down, the way people are practicing it today, it's everybody's kind of attempt to do what they think is best. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that, me being in control is what's best. And so I'm going to make that the center of everything that I
Be it
do.
far from me to
Aspiring for control,
everything.
could it be me?
Looking for fewer responsibilities across the board.
Seriously, control is a trap.
Well, any other? I feel like we've
I
covered
wish
a
we
lot
had
of good
like
stuff.
20 more hours or like 6 more videos planned so we could dive into everything we're curious about.
Yeah, I guess a little thought I just have to say while you're in the same room as me is I just appreciate how much your focus on language has clarified a lot of my ideas about the Bible and translations and mythology generally. I think people who haven't learned another language, that can be kind of hard to conceptualize how important and how fluid language actually is and how relative language is, and the murkiness of trying to, translate from one language to another and pass it off as objective truth.
Yeah.
So you've definitely brought a lot of lucidity to that process.
Oh, well, awesome. I'm so glad to hear that, because that's something that I realized when I started learning other languages, and particularly ancient languages, is just how much they're all attempts to kind of materialize something that's conceptual. And so they're all different ways of doing it. And we tend to assume that languages can represent things isometrically. Something I do when I teach Hebrew is usually we get to some point where we translate something where it says the Spirit of the Lord came to so-and-so. And it's like in the Hebrew, the verb that is being used has nothing to do with motion. It literally says the Spirit became or was to so-and-so. And so I say, okay, so you have kind of in your head this image of what it is. Now, how do you translate that in a way that doesn't sound weird to everybody, that sounds understandable without misrepresenting the imagery? And there's not really a way to do it in English. It's not that conceptual package there is not easily transmittable in a way that sounds natural in the English language. And so I use that as an illustration of just how much we're kind of contorting the the message to fit how we use language. And usually I enjoy seeing the light bulbs that come on and over some people's heads when they get to that point, because then they will start to think about learning the language in different terms, because they think it's just about finding out what the equivalents are for everything. And no, it's really about trying to think in a different way and produce linguistic expressions that operate in very different ways. So I appreciate that you got that out of it, because that's something that I get out of it, and I don't know that I've intentionally tried to transmit that. But
It comes through. It definitely
good.
does.
I'm glad to hear that. I appreciate that.
I would, if you have some tips for people who are interested in learning and sifting the chaff from the wheat as far as information and more accurate knowledge goes. How do people avoid the bad ideas, the conspiracy theories, the myths? How can people become better thinkers?
Oh, there are a lot of good ways to do that. I think one of the first things, and it's what my motto, Data Over Dogma, I think tries to get at, is treat everything as with scrutiny, and look for people who are presenting information backed up by sources and by data. And so, like, you could find something and you Google this claim, and maybe you find 1,000 websites and they all repeat the claim, but none of them tells you where you can go find the data that demonstrate the claim. That's problematic. As intuitive as it may sound, as much as it may fit your worldview, if none of them are able to point you in the direction of data, that's problematic. So when you're trying to chase down citations and things like that, look for academic sources rather than websites. Look for people who are going to cite primary sources as well. So a primary source is the original text itself. So if somebody says, oh, Julius Caesar said this, but they can only point you to like a text from medieval Europe or something like that, that's not a primary source. If they point you all the way back to something that was supposed to have written by Julius Caesar, and there's an academic text that discusses that, that's a much more reliable citation. And, a lot of conspiracy theories, particularly when it comes to the celebration of Easter and Christmas, are examples of claims that you can find in 1 billion websites, but nobody can point you to a primary source.
I actually shared one of those memes and then saw you do a video on it. I was like, delete. Didn't do my research.
And there's even with the December 25th claim, there's an argument that was, I think, first popularized by Fraser in The Golden Bough, but the idea was, we have this 4th century text where somebody said, oh, we changed the date of Christmas so that it aligned with a pagan celebration, so that it was easier for converts to feel comfortable within Christianity. And Fraser cites a text that is supposed to be from this 4th century Christian. You can track, and there are academic texts out there that cite this, and they cite the primary text. And so on the surface, it looks good. It looks like this is a claim that is supported by the data. But if you go track down the primary source, and I didn't discover this on my own, there are others who were able to track this down, but they found the 12th century text that was supposed to be citing, or supposed to be reproducing this 4th century text. And it turns out that what is attributed to a 4th century Christian was actually just something scribbled in the margins of the text by someone after the text was originally written, saying, well, this is why they did that. And so someone along the way, if someone engages that text in transliteration or something, and it's not clear that this was actually just a marginal note from another scribe, they might confuse it for something that's in the text itself. So even scholars get in trouble not adequately tracking down sources. And so, the scholars who have the time and the resources and the interest in tracking those things down will usually try to go all the way back to the earliest thing we can find. And, frequently that means you have to be able to know the language, and that's why it's so inaccessible for so many people. But so if you hear claims, try to find out where those are coming from, try to track down the sources. When it comes to the Bible, I always recommend a book written by a scholar named John Barton, who is an Oxford professor and also an Anglican priest. But he wrote a book called A History of the Bible, the Book and Its Faiths. And it's critical scholarship, and it is a phenomenal introduction to where the text of the Bible came from and how and why they have been interpreted the way they have within Judaism and Christianity ever since. And it's a fascinating book. So I always recommend that book as well.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
And then when it comes to the Bible, I also recommend a good study Bible. Like the SBL Study Bible has the updated edition of the New Revised Standard Version, which is the translation I generally recommend. And then there will be a 6th edition of the New Oxford Annotated Bible that'll come out in the next year or two that will include that updated edition as well. That, you know, they have a bunch of good introductions to the books. They have a bunch of good explanatory notes. Some of them even have thematic essays in the back and all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to the Bible, I would recommend getting those kind of publicly available resources that have been provided by critical scholars. And I have a book myself coming out next year that'll be called The Bible Says So. And it'll be all about what the Bible does or doesn't say about a bunch of different claims based on social issues and also theological issues as well.
Cool.
So
Can't wait to
Amazing.
review it.
Yeah, come back when you're on your press tour.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait for that book to come out. I just submitted the corrections to the manuscript last week. So,
Cool.
So hopefully we should be getting a cover and pre-orders here before too long. So
Very cool.
yeah,
Congrats.
I'm excited about it. Thank you.
It's got to be a lot of work.
It's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of fun. It's been an entirely new experience doing a trade book rather than an academic book, but it'll be fun.
Well, any last shout outs, ideas,
calls
hot
to
tips and
action.
tricks?
Life hacks.
I don't think so. The only thing that I'm supposed to plug that I always forget about is my podcast. My co-host is annoyed with me about that, but I do co-host a weekly podcast called the Data Over Dogma podcast, where we do the same thing I try to do on social media: increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and then combat the spread of misinformation about the same. So our episode that just came out yesterday, well, on Monday, was on the historicity of David. So, fun discussion about that. And then we also talked about the Song of Deborah, which I mentioned a little bit ago in Judges 5.
We love Debbie.
And the story behind that, yeah.
Cool. Yeah,
Sweet.
everyone go listen. Data Over Dogma. Buy your shirt.
Yes,
All
support
the
Dan in all
merch.
the ways. If you want to support us, you can join us on Patreon. We're reading Tennis Shoes Among the Nephites. Very historically accurate,
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you would say.
Not pseudopographic, actually doctrinal.
Just straight facts. Thank you all for being here. We hope you enjoyed this.
If you loved Dan, sound off in the comments, and we'll see if we can get him back when his book is
Yeah, please.
on tour.
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Okay,
right. Thanks for
bye.
watching. Thanks
It's
so
been
much,
great.
Dan.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thanks, Silas, special
Yeah,
guest.
thank you, Silas. Nervous to find out his day rate, but